Keanu Reeves was tired. Not just the kind of tired you feel after a long day at work, but a deep, heavy tiredness that settles in your bones. For months he had been running from one movie set to another. His days were filled with bright lights, loud explosions, and directors shouting instructions through megaphones. His nights were often spent in hotel rooms, far away from home, just trying to sleep so he could wake up and do it all over again. He loved his job, he really did. But sometimes being famous felt like a heavy backpack that he could never take off. He couldn't just go to the grocery store or walk down the street without people pointing their phones at him or asking for pictures. He missed the simple days when he could just be a normal guy, blending into the crowd on this particular evening. The weather in New York City was crisp and cold. The wind was blowing hard, making people rush to get indoors. Keanu looked out the window of his apartment and watched the busy city life. He felt a sudden, strong hunger. He didn't want room service. He didn't want a private chef to cook him something fancy. He wanted a real meal. He wanted a thick, juicy steak with potatoes, the kind of meal that makes you feel warm inside, but going out was always a risk. If he walked into a restaurant looking like himself, the peaceful dinner he imagined would turn into a circus. People would whisper. Phones would come out. He would have to smile and be polite, even when he just wanted to eat in silence. He needed a plan. Keanu walked into his bathroom and looked in the mirror. He looked at his famous face, the one that millions of people knew from the movies. He knew he had to change it. He didn't have a professional makeup artist with him, so he had to use whatever he could find. He grabbed an old baseball cap and pulled it down low over his forehead. It cast a shadow over his eyes, which was a good start. Next, he found a heavy, dark coat that he hadn't worn in years. It was big and baggy, making him look much larger than he actually was. He dug through a drawer and found a fake mustache that he had kept as a joke from a Halloween party years ago. He carefully stuck it above his lip and stepped back to check the mirror. The man staring back at him didn't look like a movie star. He looked like a regular guy, maybe someone on his way home from a construction job. It wasn't a perfect disguise, but it was enough. He hoped it would be enough. He stepped out of his building and pulled the collar of his coat up high. The New York wind hit his face, but it felt good. It felt real. He walked briskly, keeping his head down, blending in with the hundreds of other people hurrying down the sidewalk. No one stopped him. No one screamed his name. For the first time in a long time, he felt invisible. And it was a wonderful feeling. He turned a corner and saw a small, classic steakhouse. It wasn't one of those trendy, expensive places where celebrities usually go. It was a place with wooden tables, red checkered napkins, and the smell of grilled meat and butter in the air. It looked perfect. Keanu took a deep breath and opened the heavy wooden door. The restaurant was buzzing with noise. The sound of clinking silverware, loud laughter, and glasses clinking filled the air. It was warm and cozy. He walked to the host stand, trying to look casual. A young man looked up from his computer. "Just one?" The host asked, not even looking twice at the man in the baggy coat. "Yeah, just me," Keanu mumbled, keeping his voice low. "Right this way." The host led him to a small table near the back of the room, tucked away in a corner. It was perfect. It was dimly lit, and there was a large plant nearby that gave him a bit more privacy. Keanu sat down and let out a long breath he felt like he'd been holding all day. He took off his heavy coat and draped it over the chair, but kept the baseball cap on. He picked up the menu, his eyes scanning the list of food. His stomach grumbled. He was starving. He could almost taste the steak already. But even as he sat there, ready to relax, he felt a twinge of nervousness. He kept his eyes on the menu, sneaking quick glances around the room. He watched the waiters rushing by with trays of food. He watched the families eating and laughing. He waited for the moment when someone would recognize him. He waited for a waiter to pause or a customer to do a double take. He knew that at any second the bubble of anonymity could burst. A simple look, a familiar gesture, and the game would be up. Just one drink and some food, he told himself. Just stay calm. Keep the mustache on. A waitress walked over to his table. She looked busy, holding a coffee pot in one hand and a stack of plates in the other. Keanu braced himself, tightening his shoulders slightly. He looked up from under the brim of his hat, ready for the shock, ready for the "oh my God, is that you?" Instead, she just sighed, wiped a strand of hair from her forehead, and pulled out a notepad. "Hi there," she said in a tired but friendly voice. "Can I get you started with something to drink?" Keanu looked at her. Her namatag was slightly crooked. Her shoes looked worn out. She had the look of someone who had been on her feet for 10 hours straight. She didn't stare at him. She didn't ask for a selfie. She just saw a customer. "Just water, please," Keanu said, his voice rougher than usual. "And, can I order now? I'm pretty hungry." "Of course," she said, tapping her pen against the paper. "What are you in the mood for?" He pointed to the biggest steak on the menu. "The ribeye, medium rare, with a baked potato." She wrote it down quickly without blinking. "Good choice. That'll fill you up? Anything else?" "That's it," he said. "Thanks." She nodded, gave him a small, polite smile, and turned to walk away. Keanu watched her go. He let his shoulders drop. It had worked. He had ordered. She hadn't recognized him. He was just a guy in a corner ordering a steak. He leaned back in the chair, listening to the sounds of the restaurant. For a moment, he allowed himself to close his eyes. The noise of the room faded into the background. He wasn't an action hero. He wasn't a Hollywood icon. He was just Keanu, a hungry man in a New York restaurant waiting for his dinner. The smell of the kitchen drifted over, making his mouth water. It was going to be a good meal. He could feel it. But he also knew that the night wasn't over yet, and in a city like New York, anything can happen. While Keanu waited for his food, he sat back in his chair and let his eyes wander around the room. It was strange, sitting in the middle of a crowded restaurant and feeling completely invisible. He was used to people looking at him, whispering, or nudging their friends when he walked by. But tonight, under the brim of his old baseball cap and behind the scratchy fake mustache, he was just part of the furniture. The steakhouse was noisy, but it was a good kind of noise. It was the sound of people living their lives. At the table next to him, a young couple sat close together, holding hands across the table. They weren't looking at their phones. They were just looking at each other, smiling and talking about their day. It made Keanu smile to himself. It reminded him of simpler times before the world got so fast and digital. Across the room, there was a large family celebrating a birthday. A little girl was laughing as her grandfather tried to keep a party hat on his head. Keanu watched them for a moment, feeling a warm feeling in his chest. He realized how much he missed these small moments. When you are a big movie star, people often treat you like you are special, but in a way that puts you on a shelf away from everyone else. Tonight he felt like he was on the floor, right where everyone else was. Soon, the smell of grilled meat filled the air around him. His stomach gave a loud growl, and he laughed quietly. He was really hungry. A few minutes later, the waitress returned. She was carrying a heavy plate in one hand and a basket of bread in the other. She moved with the kind of speed you only learn when you are busy and have been on your feet for hours. "Here we go," she said, carefully placing the plate in front of him. "One ribeye, medium rare, and a baked potato with all the fixings." The steak looked amazing. It was perfectly seared with a dark crust, and it was sizzling hot. The steam rose up, carrying the rich scent of butter and garlic. The baked potato was wrapped in foil, steaming and puffed up. "Thank you," Keanu said, looking up at her. "It looks incredible." "You're welcome," she said, giving him a quick nod before turning to rush off to another table that was waving at her. Keanu didn't waste any time. He cut into the steak, and the knife slid through it like butter. He took the first bite and closed his eyes. It was perfect. It was juicy and salty and exactly what he needed. He chewed slowly, enjoying the flavor, feeling the tension in his body melt away with every bite. For a few minutes, he didn't think about movie scripts or paparazzi. He just thought about the food. As he ate, he watched the waitress more closely. He noticed that she was the only one really working that section of the restaurant. She was darting from table to table, refilling water glasses, clearing dirty plates, and taking orders. She looked tired. Her shift had clearly been a long one. Every time she passed him, he saw the little signs of exhaustion, the slight slump of her shoulders. The way she rubbed her lower back when she thought no one was looking, yet she never stopped being polite. Even when customers were rude, she kept a smile on her face. At one point, a loud group of men in expensive suits sat down in the middle of the room. They were talking loudly and banging on the table, demanding service immediately. When the waitress hurried over to take their order, they didn't even look at her. They just shouted their drinks at her like she was a robot. One of the men snapped his fingers at her to get her attention. Keanu watched this happen, and he felt a familiar anger rise up inside him. He hated seeing people treated poorly, especially people who were working hard. He saw the waitress flinch slightly when the man snapped his fingers, but she just nodded, wrote down the order, and hurried away to the bar. When she came back, she served them with the same professionalism as she served everyone else. Even though they didn't deserve it, Keanu admired that. He respected people who had grit, people who kept going even when things were tough. He knew what it was like to struggle. Before he became famous, he had lived out of his car. He had worked hard for every single opportunity he got. Seeing this waitress made him remember those days. He saw a bit of himself in her, a person just trying to do their best in a world that doesn't always make it easy. About halfway through his meal, the waitress came back to check on him. She looked a little breathless. "How is everything tasting?" she asked, wiping her hands on her apron. "It's fantastic," Keanu said honestly. "Honestly, one of the best steaks I've had in a long time." "You were right, it really hit the spot." She smiled a genuine smile that reached her eyes. For a second, the tiredness left her face. "I'm really glad to hear that," she said. "We try hard here, even on busy nights like this." She started to turn away, but Keanu stopped her. "Hey, I noticed those guys over there are giving you a hard time. You're doing a great job. Don't let them get to you." She stopped and looked at him, surprised by the kindness in his voice. Most customers ignored her or complained. This strange man in the corner was the only person who had acknowledged how hard she was working. "Thank you," she said softly. "It's just been one of those nights, you know? But I'm almost done. Thanks for saying that." "No problem," Keanu said. "Hang in there." She gave him a small salute and walked away to deal with the loud table again. Keanu watched her go. He felt a connection with her even though they were strangers. In a world full of fake people and fake conversations, her hard work felt real. It was grounding. He finished his steak and scraped up the last bit of potato with his fork. He was completely full. He wiped his mouth with the napkin and took a long drink of water. He felt relaxed in a way he hadn't felt in months. The disguise, the noise of the restaurant, and the good food had combined to give him a perfect break from reality, but he knew he couldn't stay forever. The restaurant was starting to thin out a little bit, and he didn't want to push his luck. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his wallet. He was ready to pay the bill and leave a big tip. He knew that life was expensive in the city, and he hoped that a little extra money might make her night a little bit easier. He looked around for the waitress. She was at the computer, entering orders, looking focused. He didn't want to interrupt her, so he just sat and waited, watching the people of New York City go about their evening. He took a deep breath, feeling grateful for this small slice of normal life. He had come in hiding, hoping not to be seen, but instead he had really seen someone else. And that made the meal taste even better. As he sat there, digesting his food and watching the staff clean up tables, he felt a sense of peace. The night wasn't over yet, though. Something told him that the interaction with the waitress wasn't quite finished. There was a feeling in the air, a quiet anticipation, as he waited for the check to arrive. He didn't know that she was about to do something that would completely surprise him, something that would remind him why kindness is the most powerful thing in the world. Keanu leaned back in his chair, letting out a satisfied sigh. The heavy meal had done exactly what he wanted it to do. The tension in his shoulders had melted away, and for a little while, he had just been a guy enjoying a good dinner. But now, as the restaurant started to empty out a bit, the reality of the outside world began to creep back in. He knew he couldn't hide in the corner forever. He pulled his wallet out of his pocket and placed it on the table. Preparing to pay and slip back into the night, he looked around for the waitress. She was still moving fast, wiping down a table across the room. Even though the crowds were getting smaller, she didn't slow down. Keanu watched her with a sense of respect. He knew that kind of work. It was physical, it was mental, and it required you to keep smiling even when your feet hurt and you just wanted to go home. He remembered the days when he was struggling, working odd jobs just to pay rent, wondering if his life would ever get better. Looking at her, he saw that same grit. He caught her eye and gave a small wave. She nodded, finished cleaning the table, and walked over to him. She pulled a small black receipt book out of her apron pocket. "Finished?" she asked, her voice sounding a little more tired now than it had earlier. "Yeah, I'm done," Keanu said. "It was really great. Thank you." "I'm glad," she said, tearing a piece of paper out of the book and placing it face down on the table. "Here's the check. Take your time." Keane reached for the paper. He was planning to leave a tip that would make her jaw drop. He knew what it was like to rely on tips. He knew that a single good night could change a whole week for a working person. He wanted to give her that feeling. He wanted to be the mystery customer who made her struggle a little bit easier. He turned the check over and looked at the total. It was a reasonable price for the steak, but he was ready to add a lot of zeros to the tip line. He opened his wallet, ready to pull out the cash, but before he could write anything down, the waitress came back. She wasn't holding a pen or a credit card machine. She was standing there, twisting her hands together in her apron, looking a little nervous. She hesitated for a moment, looking down at the table, then up at Keanu. "Actually, sir," she said softly, "I wanted to talk to you about the check." Keanu looked up, confused. He assumed she needed his card or that there was a problem with the machine. "Is everything okay?" he asked. "Do you need me to come to the register?" No, she said quickly. She took a deep breath, as if she was building up the courage to say something difficult. "I talked to the manager. I know we're busy, and I know you're just trying to have a quiet meal. I noticed earlier. You just look like you're carrying a heavy load tonight." Keanu froze. He stiffened in his seat. He thought for sure that she had recognized him. He thought she was about to say, "I know you're Keanu Reeves," and ask for a picture or an autograph. He braced himself for the moment his cover would be blown. He felt his heart beat a little faster. "I watched you while you were eating," she continued, her voice gentle and kind. "You looked so peaceful for a few minutes. And then, when you looked at that table of rude guys, you looked sad? You looked like you understood what it feels like to be treated like you don't matter." Keanu just stared at her. He didn't know what to say. He wasn't used to people reading him like this, especially strangers. He waited for the other shoe to drop. "I remember when my dad was going through a hard time," she said, looking down at her worn-out shoes. "He worked so hard, and he just wanted to sit down and have a hot meal without anyone bothering him. I couldn't afford to buy him dinner back then. I always wished I could have done that for him." She looked back up at Keanu, her eyes sincere. "When I saw you sitting here in the corner, trying to be invisible, it reminded me of him. So I paid for your steak." Keanu blinked. He was completely stunned. His mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. He was used to people wanting things from him. He was used to people trying to sell him things or wanting to be seen with him or wanting a piece of his fame. But this was completely different. "I'm sorry if that's weird," she added quickly, seeming to worry that she had offended him. "I know it's not a fancy restaurant, and I know you probably could buy this place 100 times over. But I just wanted to do something kind. No strings attached? I just wanted you to have a good night." Keanu sat there, completely speechless. He looked at the check in his hand, then back at the tired woman standing in front of him. The disguise, the fame, the money, none of it mattered right now. What mattered was the pure, genuine heart of this stranger. She didn't know he was a movie star. She didn't care about his money. She just saw a human being who looked like he needed a break, and she stepped up to help. She saw him. Really saw him. You paid for it?" Keanu finally managed to whisper. His voice was rough with emotion. "I did," she said, smiling shyly. It's just a steak, but I hope it makes you feel a little bit lighter. He felt a lump form in his throat. He had to look away for a second to compose himself. In all his years of traveling the world and meeting millions of people, this simple act of charity was one of the most touching things he had ever experienced. It wasn't about the money. It was about the gesture. It was about the empathy. You have no idea how much this means to me, Keanu said, looking her in the eyes. He wanted to tell her who he was. He wanted to tell her that her kindness had touched the heart of the man she might see in movies. But he held back. He knew that if he told her, it would change the moment. It would turn her gift into a story she told her friends. He wanted to keep it real. He wanted to keep it just between them. You don't have to thank me, she said softly. Just enjoy the rest of your night. Get home safe. She gave him a small nod and turned to walk away, heading back toward the kitchen. Keanu watched her go. He felt a warmth spread through his chest that had nothing to do with the food he just ate. He looked down at the bill again. On the line where the total should be, she had written in big messy letters, PAID, have a good night. He sat there for a long time, just thinking. The world could be a hard, cold place. People were often rude and selfish like the men at the loud table. But here, in this little steakhouse, was a beacon of light. This woman, who was working hard for every dollar, had spent her own money to buy a meal for a stranger in a disguise. Keanu realized that he came here looking for a steak. But he found something much more important. He found a reminder that good people still exist. He found a moment of pure connection. He knew he couldn't just walk out and leave it at that. He couldn't let her kindness go unanswered, not in the way he wanted to. If she thought he was just a regular guy, then he was going to be the most generous regular guy she had ever met. He wasn't going to reveal his face, but he was going to reveal his gratitude in a way she would never forget. He picked up his pen, his mind racing with a plan to make sure her night ended as beautifully as it had made his begin. Keanu sat quietly for a few more moments, the receipt resting on the table in front of him. The word paid seemed to jump off the page. It wasn't just a transaction. It was a message. He felt a strange mix of emotions. On one hand, he felt humbled. Here was a woman who worked long hours for probably not much money, yet she was willing to spend her hard-earned cash on a stranger. On the other hand, he felt a renewed sense of energy. He had come into the restaurant feeling tired and cynical about the world, worried that everyone only saw him as a celebrity. She proved him wrong. She saw a human being. He looked toward the kitchen where she had disappeared. He knew he couldn't just leave a normal tip. That didn't feel right. If he left $20 or even $50, it wouldn't come close to matching the kindness she had just shown him. She had given him the gift of dignity and peace. He wanted to give her the gift of freedom, even if just for a little while. Keanu opened his wallet again. It was thick with bills. He never carried cards because he liked the simplicity of cash, but tonight, that cash had a different purpose. He pulled out a stack of $100 bills. His hands moved carefully, counting them out. 1, 2, 3, 4. He kept going. He didn't stop until he had a pile that was significantly thicker than the steak. Was expensive, he thought about what she had said. She mentioned her dad. She mentioned struggling to afford things. He knew that in a city like New York, rent was high and life was expensive. This money wasn't just a tip. It was a lifeline. It could pay a month's rent. It could fix a broken car. It could buy groceries for a family. He folded the bills neatly and tucked them underneath the check so they wouldn't be visible to anyone walking by. Then, he picked up the pen again. He thought about writing a long note explaining who he was, but he stopped himself. If he signed it Keanu Reeves, the magic of the moment would shift. It would become a story about a movie star, not a story about two people connecting. He wanted to keep the focus on the kindness, not the fame. Instead, he wrote just 3 simple words in his messy handwriting. Pass it on. He placed the pen down and took a deep breath. He felt a sense of closure. He hadn't just eaten a meal. He had exchanged a piece of his heart with someone else. And he felt better for it. Keanu stood up slowly, pulling his heavy coat back around his shoulders. He adjusted the fake mustache, checking to make sure it was still in place, and pulled his hat down low. He was the anonymous stranger again, ready to disappear into the night. He looked around the restaurant. The loud group of men had finally left, making the room much quieter. The other patrons were finishing their coffees and chatting in low voices. It was late, and the city was slowing down outside the windows. Keanu picked up his gloves from the table. He didn't wave or call for the waitress. He didn't want a big goodbye. He wanted her to find the surprise when he was gone, so she could react however she wanted without feeling watched. He turned and walked toward the door. His footsteps were heavy but purposeful. As he passed the register, the manager gave him a quick nod, which Keanu returned with a silent tip of his hat. He pushed the heavy wooden door open and stepped out into the cold New York air. The wind hit his face instantly, waking him up. The street was wet from the rain earlier that day, reflecting the yellow taxi lights and the street lamps. The noise of the traffic was a low hum in the background. King took a deep breath, filling his lungs with the cold air. He felt lighter than he had when he walked in. The heavy burden of fame and exhaustion had lifted, replaced by a warm glow of gratitude. He walked down the sidewalk, keeping his head down, blending in with the few other people walking home. He didn't look back at the restaurant. He didn't need to. He knew what was happening inside the restaurant. The waitress came back out of the kitchen, carrying a pot of fresh coffee. She scanned the room, her eyes automatically going to the corner table, where the sad man with the kind eyes had been sitting. She expected to see him waiting for the check, but the table was empty. She walked over, a little confused. Maybe he had gone to the bathroom? But as she got closer, she saw the black leather folder sitting on the table. She stopped in her tracks. He hadn't just left. He had left the folder there. She reached out and picked it up. She expected to see a credit card slip or maybe cash left on top. But when she opened the folder, her breath caught in her throat. There was the check, marked paid, just like she had left it. But underneath it was a thick stack of green bills. She pulled them out, her hands shaking slightly. She flipped through them, her eyes going wide. Hundreds, so many hundreds. She quickly counted them once, then again, thinking she had made a mistake. The amount was more than she made in a month. It was more than she made in 2 months. Her knees felt weak, and she had to lean against the table for support. She looked down at the small note written on a napkin. Pass it on. Tears welled up in her eyes, blurring her vision. She couldn't believe it. She had bought him dinner because she wanted to do something nice to remember her dad. She hadn't expected anything in return. And now, this stranger had completely changed her life. She looked around the restaurant, hoping to see him, hoping to thank him, to tell him it was too much, to give it back. But the door was closed. The street outside was dark. He was gone. Meanwhile, a few blocks away, Keanu Reeves walked with a spring in his step. He thought about the waitress and the shock she was probably feeling right now. He smiled to himself, a genuine, happy smile that no one could see under the brim of his hat. He realized that night that you don't need to be a superhero to save someone's day. You don't need to be rich to be generous. Sometimes all it takes is a little bit of empathy and a willingness to see the person behind the disguise. He had gone out looking for a steak, but he had found something much more valuable. He had found a reminder that the world is full of good people. You just have to look for them in the corners, in the quiet moments. In the places where you least expect it. He turned the corner, heading toward his home, ready to sleep and face the next day with a fresh perspective. The city felt different to him tonight. It felt friendlier. It felt warmer. And somewhere behind him, a waitress was holding a stack of cash and a note, feeling the exact same way. It was a perfect circle of kindness, started by a meal and paid for with a heart of gold.